Hey folks. So we are going to continue talking about democratic reforms that occurred. Those of you guys who just got out 7th period, you of course see this, you need to watch this and take your notes. Feel free to stop whenever you might need to, because I'm going to be going a little bit quicker since you have the pause button there. But basically, this chapter has two main points: suffrage and anti-Semitism. Suffrage being the right to vote, anti-Semitism being a hatred of Jews and Jewish people. A couple events that show this was suffrage is the Chartist movement and then the women's suffrage movement. Chartist movement is basically an attempt to gain all men the right to vote, and then later all men or women to gain the right to vote under women's suffrage. Now, we talked about that aspect later or yesterday, so I'm going to kind of skip a lot of that. But essentially, the importance of this is that by gaining the right to vote, workers and then women gain more control in the government and can have laws passed to protect their interests. So this is where you start to see a lot of the laws change to protect workers during the Industrial Revolution. As far as anti-Semitism is concerned, the Dreyfus Affair we'll get to here in a second. The pogroms were a bunch of lynch mobs in Russia started by Alexander III, who was wanting to get vengeance on the Jewish people for the supposed assassination of his father. It wasn't assassination, I should say. It's just that whether the Jews were responsible for it or not is dubious. So basically, he would encourage people to go out and commit crimes, murder or hang or burn Jewish buildings, things like that. So a lot of Jews fled the country and ended up setting up shop in other countries like the United States. This led to belief of Zionism, which is the idea that the Jewish people need a homeland of their own if they're going to be safe and successful, and this led to the country of Israel. The temperance movement was part of the women's rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, which was basically trying to ban the sale of alcohol for the purpose of keeping spousal abuse down, and also to kind of get the idea of women's rights out there, because they weren't just trying to change the fact that women didn't have the right to vote, they didn't have a right to property or many other basic rights. So this was seen as sort of a stepping stone. In addition, the culture of the time, from these pictures, we see the dress and styling of individuals during the Victorian era, which tended to be fairly ornate and based around certain principles, which were espoused by Queen Victoria herself, including reputation, hard work, etiquette, the nuclear family, one's place, and morality. Now, reputation is the most important one because it reflects not only on you but also your family. Again, the importance of the nuclear family down here. And essentially, the way you got a good reputation was being a hard worker, being polite, and basically following what you were expected to do based on gender and social class. For instance, women were expected to basically stay in the home. That's what the cult of domesticity was all about. Domestic refers to the home, as well as being moral. So there was a lot of factors that contribute to this, and Queen Victoria herself, which generally speaking we see pictures that look like this, was a very, very important factor in her country. When she first became queen, she was very young, and she ended up marrying her husband Albert, and he sort of brought the best out in her. It was a partnership. They truly loved each other. It was a wonderful relationship, but he died very young, and that devastated her. For about 10 years, she ended up falling out of the public eye, and basically there's a lot of people who blamed her for a lot of problems in Britain at the time, and when she emerged out of it, she was a whole new person, a force of nature, someone who could change all aspects of not only society, but also the very fate of the country. After her reign, Britain was the most powerful country in the world, and in addition to it, the culture that develops under her, her ideals, are taken up by her subjects and spread throughout the world to a point where it's adopted pretty much everywhere, at least insofar as the European world is concerned. So she was a very important lady. And despite this, she was against women having the right to vote. So again, women were fighting an uphill battle. Two important women suffragettes were Emmeline Pankhurst and Lady Constance Lytton. As far as Emmeline's concerned, her interest was bringing women's rights to the forefront, and the fact was is women's rights were often dismissed as not being important, or that women were unintelligent. They couldn't deal with the stress of voting. They were too dainty, or what have you. So she wanted to bring it to people's attention. So she used violence, at least insofar as rioting, smashing windows, that sort of thing, to draw attention. This horrified the uh, Victorian mindset, because women were supposed to be these delicate things, and then they weren't doing that. So there's a lot of backlash against that. And when she got to prison, because they were arrested, they continued the protest by refusing to eat in what were called hunger strikes. Now, these hunger strikes um, ended in some pretty brutal treatments of their own. The ladies were not allowed to kill themselves by starving to death, so they were force-fed, which meant a fairly brutal treatment of using wood blocks and occasionally steel blocks to pry open the jaws, to force soup down the throat, or in some cases to go in through the nose. And it was an utter violation, a horrible situation. People became very weak from it because of hunger, but also because of the brutal treatment. Women's teeth were cracked. In fact, one young lady, Lady Constance Lytton, died at a fairly young age, and suspicion is because the numerous force feedings she had to endure. Next week, we'll have a blog where it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about this. But another thing of interest about Lady Constance is that she herself was a noble. In fact, her family didn't want her involved in the suffrage movement, but she agreed. They sort of agreed to it once she agreed to act as an alias. She wanted to protect her family, her reputation, or their reputation. So she started calling herself the Ugly Spinstress, which basically, if you don't know what spinstress is or spinster, it's basically like a cat lady, somebody who never gets married and is generally seen as kind of a very sad person. So it was a way of her kind of creating this character she acted as so she could do her work. And in the end, they fight very hard, and eventually, after World War II, secure the right to vote. The Dreyfus Affair was this incident where there was a Jewish army captain in France who was falsely accused of espionage because he was a Jew. Supposedly, he was selling military secrets to Germany, but the only evidence of it was two letters which were fabricated. So basically, it was a lie. And in the end, what this did is it created a giant debacle, an argument between two sides, essentially, in France. One just tried to say that it didn't matter if he had actually done it or not. It was that he was a Jew and couldn't be trusted, and in addition, his if the army was accused of this, it would dishonor them. So basically, he should stay in prison. And others sided with Dreyfus, including Emile Zola, said that it was a matter of truth and justice and needed to be exposed. And even Zola himself was arrested. I mean, it was a very severe situation. And it took something like 10 years, and eventually he was acquitted and given his position back. And I think something to kind of understand that is it's easy for us as human beings to become really passionate about a contest or a trial, and we see one side of things, and we tend to leap to that as the truth, and we don't want to be proven wrong. Even if the evidence proves it wrong, we will still kind of disagree with it. So it can ruin someone's life forever. I mean, a great example of that is the trial recently, which is David Cam, who was accused of murdering his family. And I'm not getting into the details of whether it's true or not, but what happened is once he was released from prison, there's a big backlash in the Southern Indiana community, in New Albany and Jeffersonville, saying they couldn't believe he'd been released and what have you. But the question to think about is in this case, he was accused of murdering his family of 2 kids and his wife. What if he's innocent? Someone having to go through that experience of losing their family, but not even being able to grieve because they immediately have to start defending themselves. And even once he's let out of prison, this is something that sticks with him his entire life. He can't go back to his job because he was a police officer. He can't just make it as if it never happened. It will always haunt him for the rest of his life. Same thing we see with Dreyfus. So even though it was eventually solved, it's something that never really goes away for that individual. And as far as the overall spectrum. This just shows the amount, the level of anti-Semitism that was throughout Europe. And it's going to eventually culminate in the Zionist movement and the Balfour Declaration. But we will get to that later. So that's pretty much it. Hope you guys have a good break, a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.